Hello there, Carrie Rhodes here. Welcome back to my YouTube channel and another card making video. Today I am showcasing the Spellbinders Large Die of the Month set for November 2020. This is a super cool die set because it allows you to do stitching on your cards in some fun Christmas shapes and a border. And you can see the entire set here. There are 3 shape dies that cut out the stitching elements. So here you can see the Christmas tree. You use the 2 together to die cut out the tree with the stitching. And not only are there holes for stitching, there's also decorative die cut openings on this as well. So I die cut the tree and use my tool in 1 to get out all those fallout pieces. Then I can use the shape die by itself to die cut out a second piece to go behind the tree. And here you can see the die cut snowflake with and without the detail piece. And then I'll bring in that border die and its die that cuts it out and use those together to cut a decorative border on the edge of my card front panel. And again, I'll use my tool in 1 to get out all those teeny tiny fallout pieces, and it works like a charm. I like to run it across the back as well to make it even easier to get them out. So there are the 3 pieces. There's also a guide that shows you how to do the stitching on each of these elements, and you can also see the decorative die cut pieces so you know not to cut those out. So you're going to need some DMC or embroidery type floss to create the stitching on these cards. Now these pieces, these die cuts, are just as gorgeous without stitching that you could use them without doing any stitching at all. They have a very fine doily-like look to them, and there are plenty of ideas how to use these without stitching on the Spellbinders website. And here you can see I used a little bit of a temporary adhesive on the back to hold down my floss. Now the reason why the temporary adhesive is comes off in teeny tiny dots, and that really helps me not clog up the holes with adhesive. So I'm going to come up through the hole that's indicated as number 1 and go down the hole indicated as number 2. And then I'm going to come up the next hole and always go back down into that very first hole I went through, hole number 1. So you're just going to go around like this, coming up through the next hole and going back down through hole number 1, creating sort of what I would call like a fan. So it's fanning across. I love that they've created this so when you're stitching, it's creating a pattern or a design, and they're so easy to do. If you if you're like me, you like doing those stitching cards when you were little and they had the numbers and you would stitch and make like a little animal or something. I loved doing those. That had to be like in preschool or kindergarten. So this is like the grown-up version of that. It's so much fun. The directions with it are easy to follow. There's other ways you could stitch these. If you are really into stitching and that's your thing, you could probably come up with some really creative designs with these pieces. So I'm going to flip this over and tie it off on the back. I'm not going to pull my thread down and start stitching on the next fan because that thread could show through in one of those decorative openings. So I'm going to go ahead and tie a knot and snip that off before I start the next one. Now the next 5 are exactly the same, those same fans as I did on the first one. So I've done all of those here, and I just used some floss I had on hand, but if you don't have floss, they're really inexpensive to buy. And I did split the floss down the middle, so it's 3 strands thick instead of 6. And I feel like that worked best here. So now across the bottom, there's 4 more circles, but these are going to go all the way around. So you're going to stitch the entire circle, but in the same way, coming up each hole. So I went up on number 1, down on number 2, then I'll come up on number 3 and back down through number 1. And it's just really easy to do as you go around that circle and fill it in. You always know exactly which hole to go through next. So there's 1, and then I'll finish off this tree going all around each of those circles. And there you can see the entire tree is now stitched, and we have a little section there at the bottom that's like the trunk or maybe like the holder for the tree. So I have this tan floss that's a little bit golden, and that's what I'm going to use across the bottom. So this one you're going to stitch diagonal lines So there'll be 3 lines going diagonally as you go across, and then you're going to come back and go diagonal the opposite direction, creating 3 little X's, and that will be the bottom of this tree. And it is so cute, and there's so many different color combinations you could do with these, depending on the color of cardstock you use and the color of thread that you use. And of course, you could always do these without stitching, but I thought it would be really fun and helpful to show you how I did the stitching on all of these pieces. Now I want to adhere this to that die cut colored cardstock, so I'm going to try my liquid glue here, and I'm just going to press those two together and put a heavy block on top of it, and I'll come back to it and see how I did. But now let's do my favorite piece, the snowflake. So there's a center here that's the same circle fan that we just did on the bottom of the tree. It's a little bit bigger, so you're going to go all the way around the circle. And there's how that looks with the teal thread. Again, I only used 3 strands thick to do this. I tied that off in a knot, and then I'm going to do the outer part of this snowflake in a lighter color. So here we're going to do a fan. You want to start with a hole that's in between the holes that have the triangles above them, but this is all on the direction so you can follow along. And then you're going to just repeat making a fan. There's just fans of different shapes. This one is kind of like a diamond shape where we already did half circles and full circles, and you can see how amazing that looks. So you're going to skip a hole, and then you're going to come up the next hole to do the second diamond shaped fan, and you'll go around the snowflake doing this repeatedly, and it will look like that when you're done. Isn't it gorgeous? I love it, and I just love these colors. So let's see how this one stuck together. It did really good with the liquid glue on the back of the floss. So that's what I'm going to do here for the snowflake as well. Having that colored cardstock behind really is cute to see that color pop through those die cut openings, and it looks really finished off with that behind it. I love it. All right, now let's move on to the border. So I die cut this one from colored cardstock this time, and you could do white floss or colored floss. I'm going to do a mix of a few different colors on this. So now we're going to do some square fans. Now the one on the end is just a half, but you're just going to start with hole number 1 and then go around with hole 2, 3, 4, 5. It's very easy, like I said, to figure out. Plus, on these particular dies leave etched lines, so you can kind of see the direction that the floss is supposed to go. And if you decide not to use stitching, those add a decorative element to this. Also, if you wanted faux stitching, you could take a marker with a fine tip and draw in the lines, and that would give you a whole nother look with these dies. So there you can see the half square fan, and now I'm going to do the whole one, and I'm using a light blue thread. I'm going to do the 2 squares on this end of the card with the light blue thread, and then I'm going to repeat that with the 2 squares on the left hand side to finish out with the light blue thread on this row. And then I just tied a knot off on the back again, and there you can see the finished 2 squares on the right hand side. I did the same on the left, and then I'm going to move on to the next square using a little bit darker thread, a darker blue thread. So I'm going to go for kind of an ombre look and do that on this square, and then the square on the right hand side closest to the light blue, and that's going to leave me with 1 square still open and unstitched. And here you can see I have finished off that second medium blue colored square, and the look is really coming together now. So I'll tie that off in a knot and switch colors one more time, and for my third color I'm going to use a really dark blue, almost a navy blue, and use that on that center square. And that square will finish up this top row of stitching for what I think is a pretty cool ombre look. I like the look of the colored cardstock with the colored thread. So we'll tie that off in a little knot on the back and move on to the next row in this card. Now this next row, these scallops, I found that my stitching directions did not quite show me exactly what I should do. I think it's a typo there. It said to stitch all the way around, but for this one, you're going to follow those etched lines on the scallop. So they're going to be long stitches. So you're going to go from hole number 1 and go right here below the point in the square. And it'll create these long lines, and it almost looks like a seashell. And you'll see here that it's just another kind of fan, so a scalloped fan, and it's the same technique used throughout all the stitching on these cards. So now I'm using the navy thread on the outermost scallops, and you can see there how it's supposed to look instead of what the directions tell you to do. So I'm going to tie that off, and you can see I have a dark on either end, and then I went with 2 of the medium colored blue, and then I'm going to do 2 of the lightest blue in the center. So it's opposite of what I did on the first row, and I think that really just helps create the look I was going for on this card. Gorgeous. We'll tie that one off and finish up the stitching on this panel that will become my card. Here are all 3 of the pieces that I stitched. I had so much fun doing this. It really could be something you could sit and do while you watch a movie. All right, so now for the tree and the snowflake, I'm going to create some ornaments or tags with these DIY hoops. So I have a watercolor background left over from another project. I traced my hoop onto that. This is the medium hoop from that DIY hoop set. And this is a background I stamped with a background stamp and Distress Oxide ink, and I sprayed the stamp before I stamped it down on this paper. I believe it was Twisted Citron ink that I used here, and I will link this stamp for you below if it's still available. So after tracing those, I'm cutting them out, cutting on the inside of my trace line so that the circle is just a hair smaller than my hoop, and I will glue those down with liquid glue and make sure they have plenty of time to dry. And I'll repeat that with this holly pattern, letting that dry. Once they are dry, I'm just going to glue down both of my pieces onto their matching hoops, and they make such cute tags, ornaments, or even a focal piece for a card, because these DIY hoops are thin and lightweight, so they're easy to put on top of a card. All right, so I'm using this stamp set here to stamp out Merry Christmas in Turbo Teal and Fresh Forest ink. And once I have those stamped out, I'm going to use a banner die and die cut them out to have a sentiment for the front of my ornaments. I used the combination of some double stick tape and liquid glue to add the sentiment across the center of my hoop, and that will make sure that it holds really secure because I want it to last a long time. So that's why I used both of those adhesives, the tape and the glue. So I'll finish that off by trimming the excess so that it is going with the curve of the hoop. And there are both of those ornaments. They needed a little dressing up now, a little bling. So I pulled out some silver thread or like twine that I had on hand and tied a triple bow using my fingers as a guide, and that will just add a little bit more decoration to these already gorgeous ornaments. So I tied that off, and then I'll stick it onto the wooden part of the hoop with a glue dot, and that should hold it pretty secure. If not, you could also try maybe a dot of hot glue. So I'll push the glue dot down and then press the bow into that. And I'm going to trim these off so the ends are a little bit shorter, but I just love the look of that really soft and silvery thread. I mean, it kind of has like the feel of tinsel, and I thought it was great for an ornament. And then I added a second piece through the top there that would be the string you use to hang this on your tree, or attach it to a present if you want it to be a tag. There is a to and from stamp in the sentiment set that I used here, and you could stamp that on the back as well. So there's both of the ornaments all finished. I love these. They were just so gorgeous. I felt like they needed to be ornaments. and I am happy with how they turned out. So now let's move on to the card. I have a card front here. I'm going to use just this die that will cut around my decorative piece, but I'm going to use it on the edge of my card front so that it will also have a scallop, and that way the edge of my card is a little bit decorative and follows that same scalloped edge. I added some double stick tape to the back of my stitch panel and some fun foam and foam squares and liquid glue to make sure that this stuck down really well to my card. Now for the front, I'm adding a piece of darker blue cardstock and framing that with some super thin, like about 1/4 of an inch strip of silver cardstock to the top and the bottom. And once those are glued and set, I'll trim off the excess. And then I'm bringing back that Holiday Joy stamp set and stamping this larger image that says Peace, Love, Joy, I believe, and stamping that with Catalina splash ink because I wanted to have, oh, Peace on Earth, that's what it says. I wanted to have like my 3 colors of blue represented with the light blue cardstock, the darker blue cardstock, and then the kind of the medium tone. I'm using my Special Day tag die set to die cut this out, and then that will be the focal point of this card. I'm using this die here that's a former large die of the month die set, and I just thought this particular shape right here was a perfect foliage piece to go with my card in silver and blue. They're so fun for Christmas cards. So there we'll put the Peace on Earth stamped image in the center. I'll add Merry Christmas to the inside of the card. And then we needed a titch more bling, so I brought in some silver pearls, and I did also combine that with liquid glue just to make sure this really stuck on top of the floss there. I did 2 tiny ones on either side, then I did 2 medium ones, and then the biggest pearl or silver element in the center. And you could really add these little pearls or gems to the center of the Christmas tree and the snowflake too, where those holes are. It would just look really cute. So there are my 3 projects with the large die of the month set. I thought it was so much fun to play with. I hope you love it too and maybe got some inspiration while you were here. I will have all the things I used today listed and linked for you below, as well as a brand new club kit that Spellbinders just came out with. It's a clear or photopolymer stamp set that is only $10 and will come to your door every month. It's like such a good deal. So I'll link to that below so you can check it out and see if it's something you would like. I hope you are having a fabulous week and happy stamping. Bye.